Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. Just going to give everyone 30 seconds or so. Emma's behind the scenes. She's going to press enter and admins and all those types of things. I've got lots of QR codes for you, everybody. So if you have a mobile phone to hand to do some scanning on the screen, that will help us move through the content very quickly. I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes just kind of setting the scene. I know you've had a pre-recording video, you've had some reading material, so I just want to just go through the kind of origins of the verbal feedback research. I'm going to give away some of my books, so if you reflect and tag me online and let me know what you think, I'll post some resources to you to support you. Loads of QR codes. I'll model one or two of the ideas, and then I believe you've got a breakout session after I finish, where you can talk about some of the ideas in greater depth. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour for me to go some of the theory and just model one or two of the ideas under the kind of guise of A-level teaching and feedback and marking, etc., etc. So without further ado, I'll get my screen up. Here we go. And if you have any questions in the chat box, just for your awareness, your comments in the chat box come to me only just to help reduce that cognitive load on your side, so that I can focus on that content. So feel free to pose a question as we go through, and I'll pause regularly and I'll go through the chat box and see what you have to say. So formative, summative assessments, and feedback variables. I'm going to reference one or two bits of research. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, and I'm also conscious we don't have a lot of time together, so I'm going to go straight in to the material. In summary, there are several ways, and I'm going to, I guess after today, I want you to ban the word marking in your schools, and perhaps also move away from the word feedback. A lot of the work that I do in schools today is looking at teaching and learning policies, particularly feedback policies, and moving that dialogue into the next decade to support you, teacher well-being, teacher workload. We all have a common problem. We don't have enough time. And what we want to do is to help our students actually move forward in terms of their progress, acting on the feedback we provide them. So those are the kind of premise of why we're here. Here's the first QR code, everybody. So if you have your mobile phone to hand, or in fact on this particular screen, you can just type in that hyperlink onto your screen on your side. It needs a capital CPD to work, lowercase pack. That will take you to all the slides and the templates that I share with you, and Emma will circulate these with you anyway. So I'll give you a moment just to scan that. Okay, so capital CPD, and if I can ask Emma, just listening behind the scenes, just to copy and paste that into the chat box for everyone, that will be very, very helpful. So I'll remind you of that as we go through. Okay, next one is this one. So if you scan this QR code, these are all the sketch notes from my work published, Mark Plan Teach, about 4 or 5 years ago. I had these cartoons produced behind the scenes for many years. I'm only now just starting to share them with everyone. So this will download a zip file. It needs a capital MPT in that red box for it to work. These are the 34 summaries from all the research, the cognitive science, and the practical ideas that have been built, tested in many, many schools around the world on my travels, and using the insights from my website. So 16 million teachers have read my website. The average reading time, no surprise, is 70 seconds. So these cartoons are your 60-second summaries, perfect for people like you and I who are time poor. We don't have a lot of time, and we need to access research materials very quickly. Now, in summary, inside those ideas, I'm going to just put them all on the screen. These are the marking and assessment ideas. I'm only going to kind of just dip in and out of idea 2, 3, and 4 in our session today, and number 10, which is drawn upon the verbal feedback research I initiated a couple of years ago. I won't dwell on anything to do with plan. So these are all your 10 ideas in plan. You know, you'll be familiar with a 5-minute lesson plan as a thinking process, not necessarily a form filling exercise, to help you with cognitive thinking about how you go through a lesson plan process. And then the last section, the last 10 ideas are all these ideas, being clear and precise, thinking about immersion, so the flow, high challenge, low stress, work in memory. And I might just touch on, if we have time, number 5, using questioning as an assessment method. One more QR code before we start. In the bottom right hand corner there, that's just the placemat. So it's just looking at all these ideas in a different way. So I know you've all got sixth form. One school's about to have a sixth form, and there should be about 120 of us here, and all of you will have different roles, different experience. So the top green line are all the Mark Plan Teach ideas mixed, but are particularly for classroom teachers. If you're a middle leader, so you're a teacher in charge of somebody else, that middle row, that orange line, so that's just signposting which ideas are relevant for your experience. And then if you're a school leader, it's all those cultural whole school ideas at the bottom, but they're all for you, but I just thought that might just give you a little bit more support. Okay, and there's a reminder, so throughout the whole session, after tonight, tomorrow morning, if you just tag me online, I'll send a book to you, just as a thank you for watching and some reflections. It's important that we all reflect. I know these ideas work, but what you need to ask is in what conditions, and that's really important. When we think about the wide range of teaching experience, and obviously we're coming here from an A-level perspective, it's important to consider those reflections. So I'd be appreciated of your thoughts, and I'll happily send you a resource after the session. Okay, a little bit of feedback from you. So if you can type this hyperlink onto your desktop or on your mobile phone, I've got just got 3 or 4 of these, just part of the work that I do, research and teacher workload over the last decade. Be interested in your thoughts. So the first slide, I'm just going to reset this one. The hyperlink should appear at the top of the screen just to get connected. Just tell me what you had for breakfast. So I can see you're online. The hyperlink's at the top, poollev.com/teacher toolkit. I won't stay on this one far too long. Okay, right, this is the key question I want to ask. So your device will automatically refresh. Here it comes now. Just give me a second, any second, here we go. Oh, one too many, here we go. So this will refresh on your device. Let me reset it. There we go. So just tell me one of the things that drives you mad in your place of work. Type one word, press submit. And once you've typed in one, type in another and press submit again. Maybe do 3 or 4 separate keywords, and let's build up a Wordle. We've got 70 odd people in, so we could easily get up to 200 or 300 results. So let's see, and then I'll tell you what I've seen on my travels, and I guess under one aspect of my work, an online blogger, and all the insights and analytics I see. Okay. Okay, so it didn't take long for the M word to appear, marking, marking, marking. Now I've shared this slide with 85,000 teachers, and I can tell you for free that in every type of school, the word marking features regularly. It's interesting that behavior is there. Behavior is an issue for all of us, but it doesn't appear frequently, actually. It's not to say that it's not a challenge and it's not something that should be a priority. Of course it is, but that marking, marking, marking always features that, and you'll know more than I, that as an A-level teacher, that marking burden is significant. Okay, so thank you for that. Right, 2 more, and then we'll plow forward. On your device, tell me 3 or 4 priority things on your device that you find challenging. So assessment is your marking and data collection at the top. EdTech are all the online platforms that you log into, etc. And I'll tell you what I've seen again on my travels. This is from my Just Great Teaching research, so visiting schools all across the UK. So 300 teachers, 10,000 bits of data. What did they say? Okay, so you're going with teacher wellbeing. Right, I shall show you the results. I'm going to change the question. This is the last one, just ever so slightly. I just want you to tell me, where do you think teachers lack confidence? So the same priorities, but where do you think they lack confidence the most? Okay, thank you for all your information. Okay, so it's a 2-3 horse race. Let's see. Give you another 30 seconds on that one. Okay, so I'm going to go with mental health, SEN, and research. Okay. So I haven't got the head teacher data for you. I've just got the teacher data. No surprise that teachers, their strengths, mark, plan, teach. I'm happiest in the classroom. That's where teachers want to be and where they thrive. But where they struggle, you've correctly identified teacher well-being. Confidence actually was SEN more than anything else, and managing complex pupil mental health. I think if you're active on social media, you'll see a big explosion of teacher research. Fantastic. The challenge with all research is trying to access it, digest it, and translate it back into your setting. I'll just pause on this slide before we move forward. I think this sums up what I've seen on my travels. And what I do when I'm in schools doing teacher training, I just talk about teacher autonomy, teacher happiness, I suppose, and how we can help schools stay in the middle despite all those challenges. I guess a question from me before we move forward: where do you think your school best fits on this scale? So feel free to put a comment in the chat box. Again, it comes to me only if you want to leave a comment. Okay, so ideal answer: your schools, and define happier in lots of different ways, are perfectly in this middle left. Okay, there's that QR code again to all the slides. If you've not got that, that hyperlink, capital CPD lowercase pack, bit.ly/CPD, capital CPD lowercase pack. Okay, right, just so you've heard it from me directly, just a quick introduction on the verbal feedback report. This stemmed from many years ago, probably going back to early 2010s, the frustration about teaching and learning in particular. I'm a design and technology teacher, you know, banging a hammer, making a chair, a couple of annotations, sketches in books. Someone pops into your classroom doing a deep dive, work scrutiny. They don't think there's lots of information in there. They're not a subject expert. And then there's lots of these perceptions, fads, etc., emerge because of someone else's perception of what they view assessment should look like in another subject. And we still, not everywhere, but we still have this perception that written feedback is the best form. So that's where the verbal feedback research started to immerse. And on my social channels in particular, particularly with Teacher Toolkit on Twitter, I had 110 schools sign up for the verbal feedback research, but I soon found myself out of my depth collecting the data. So I went to UCL, University College London, and commissioned the research. A couple of key bits of information before that research emerged was this. I wonder how many of you in the chat box know what the etymological meaning of the word assessment is. Any takers? Anyone want to have a punt in the chat box without having a quick search on Google? Let me know. Okay, so we've got one correct answer. Fantastic. So it actually means to sit beside. It's etymological origins. So here you go. Obviously, that language evolves over time. It might mean now that you sit on your computer by yourself, entering data on Sims, or sitting on your kitchen table on Sunday nights, marking books by yourself. So you can see how language evolves. And some of you might be familiar also with teacher tap. This is a couple of years ago, or 4 years ago, this screenshot in particular. Teacher tap surveys about 12,000 teachers every day. I think they just take Christmas Day off. And this was a particular one for me. If you work in a disadvantaged primary or secondary school, you're more likely to be told to mark maybe once a week and use a particular coloured pen. So you can see here, if you're familiar with the IDACI index, deprivation and child index, in quintile 5, if you've got a high population of pupil premium children, your school's more likely to say mark once a week, tickled pink, think green, or purple pen of progress. So I wanted to kind of challenge all this. So very quickly moving through, those are the 7 secondary schools, not primary schools, that fit into this quintile 5 category, high proportion of free school meals. Thankfully, the head teachers let 2 teachers out each. So these are the schools. So there's a couple in London close to you. Here I am with at the top with the teachers going through all the strategies. Mark Quinn here, helping the teachers think as like a researcher in the classroom, ethics, data collection, anonymity, publishing the research, and trialing the ideas, and so on. And this is the question that the teachers came up with themselves. To what extent does verbal feedback from October to June have an impact? So trying to get into some of the practical ideas very quickly. They define engagement on 4 pages. I won't go through this, but you can see it all in the report. The evidence in particular, rather than having to write everything down. And these are the strategies that we use. So you can see the most popular out of the 13 teachers on the right-hand side, the frequency. So we're going to have a play with a couple of ideas in a moment, and you can talk about these in your breakouts. And this was the summary. And again, there's lots more behind this, but I've highlighted the one in green in particular. The teachers said they no longer spend time marking. Instead, they spend time planning better lessons. And as a result, they meet the needs of their children. And one teacher contacted me several months later, said, I can see my family again on Sunday night. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So there's that QR code. If you've not had a look at it, or if you've not printed it off and put it under the nose of your school leaders, it is really starting to make a difference. And most people are now moving beyond marking into feedback. And I also want to, for those who are in the world of feedback, taking you a little bit further. Before I do that, I'm going to just share 2 of the most practical ideas. So there's that QR code. Last chance to scan that if you've not looked at that research already. And we'll go into the first kind of practical demo. So live assessment, I suppose. Now you're all brilliant at this. This is the 7 recommendations from the Education Endowment Foundation. So it's nothing new, just reminding you of where we should spend our efforts, what great assessment, live assessment in particular, does in the classroom. So I'm just going to show you a very popular strategy and focus on these 3 areas in red. On my travels, and here's a QR code while I just introduce the idea. On my travels, I worked with a school in Nottinghamshire called George Spencer Academy, and they had this idea called yellow box marking. And I introduced it into my school as a deputy head teacher, and the teaching staff absolutely loved it. But the idea soon became a bit of a beast or an incarnation, particularly when deep dives or Ofsted inspections were involved, and teachers started to adapt the idea to suit evidence trails rather than to meet the needs of their pupils to act on feedback. So there's the QR code. Inside you're going to get, and I'm going to switch my visualizer on in a minute, you've got 3 or 4 example assignments, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 I can send you behind the scenes. Just some screenshots here. The principle is, so I call it zonal feedback. In fact, I'd probably change the word feedback now. Of course, this is nuance required with language, but the principle of the original yellow box idea was to find one thing and fix. And when you're thinking about working with students with their assessment objectives and you highlight the marking criteria for them, this is pretty much what you do day in, day out. There's a math example. This is a Key Stage 3 example. The teacher in the bottom left here, yellow box, empty yellow box, student responds. Here's another example from Key Stage 3. So it's teaching students how to self-regulate and respond to your feedback. And when you get up to A level, of course, this detail becomes in greater depth. There's the original methodology here. Now, the original idea, and if you've been long enough in the classroom, you'll know the other acronym DIRT, Direct Improved Reflection Time. I think we need to build in time for students to respond, and whether that's in class or at home, that's your choice. But I'm just going to model the idea. So if I just pop back to, I'm just going to come out my slides. If you haven't already had a chance to scan the screen, there's that QR code. If you want to, in fact, I'll just copy this in the chat box if you've got a phone to hand. Here it comes. So just open that on your side. Now I'm just going to switch. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to switch my camera over and just put, oops, let's get that back on. So you should be able to see my desk. And I'm just going to go to very quickly as an example, zoom in for you here. And I hope you can still hear me. I've just pressed the filter, bear with me. There we go. So Christian attitudes to wealth and poverty. So I think this is on page 3 of your download. The idea in principle was, as a teacher, to just identify misconceptions, spelling mistakes, and as soon as we apply a frequency to this, then it becomes, like any teaching idea, a bit of an issue. So I'll give you some good and bad examples in a moment. But if I just zoom in on the kind of introduction to this assignment, Bryce is a high attaining student. You know, let's ignore his handwriting because that's a poor proxy for learning. It doesn't tell us whether he knows what he's doing or not. Let's just zoom in on this. There is nothing wrong with being wealthy. It is how people use their money that matters. So we've got our SP for a spelling mistake. There's a bold claim here. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. It's how you use your money. So I want Bryce to elaborate on this. So there's you know, drawing in upon some metacognition. Tell me why. So the original concept was that, and there's no space here at the bottom of the assignment. So I'm just going to fold the page over, an empty box with some action points that you want the student to do. So in this case, for the spelling mistake, I might want Bryce, whether we're lining up on the corridor outside or in class, or whisper in his ear, whatever it might be. Bryce, can we spell the word there correctly? And 1, get it right for the rest of your life. 2, use it in other subjects. And also maybe redraft this paragraph and give me an example why, and with the correct spelling. And the point here is that it's focused. It's not too much of cognitive load. Yes, there'll be occasions when we want to go into greater depth, particularly when we're working at A level, where you'll have a lot more context to mark. Students will have a greater depth of understanding. But Bryce, in this case, is just year 8, 13 years old. So let me show you, before I put my slides full screen, I just want to show you some good and bad examples of this strategy in particular. So here is a good example. Now, this example, everybody, is in Welsh. This is the Battle of Hastings, King Harold. But if you'll notice here, I did study Welsh at one point in my school career. Gilvar means smart. Gelvin, you'll see the teachers edited, the students redrafted. Grammatical fix, smarter king. There's one simple example. Like all teaching ideas, sometimes they can get lost in theory. Sometimes they can be for good or bad. Here is an example where the teachers used the yellow box. And in A-level marking in particular, you might write AO1, AO2, assessment objectives met in the margin as a reference point, students highlighting the text, etc. But you can see here, the teachers ticked man, knew, wasn't, good idea. So obviously that's their cognitive processes as they're assessing the work. Now, if we think back to the word assessment, to sit beside, if this teacher has not sat beside the student to explain what these ticks mean, we'll know the tick and flick rhetoric is, you know, it's a redundant process and it's adding to your workload, and it's not going to make much difference to student progress. So there's a good and bad example. And that was one of the key strategies that most of the teachers took away from the verbal feedback report. There's pros and cons to everything. I won't go through all these now. I think the important point is, as soon as you apply a frequency to any marking and feedback policy, or if you force your teachers to use a particular colored pen or else, then it becomes a little bit dangerous. There is something to be said for maybe using a particular style of marking. So let's call it the purple pen of progress. Why? Because you're teaching students how to identify where you have responded to help them also save time and act on your feedback. So pros and cons to everything. I'm certainly not here to advocate banning coloured pens or banning marking, but I just want to give you something to think about. The next idea I want to talk about is how do we get to a place where students can start to do these things for themselves. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Evidence-Based Education Organisation. They published a fabulous piece of research called the Great Teaching Toolkit last summer. So there's tons of stuff in there about how to activate hard thinking. And at the end, I'll finish on that particular strategy and set of resources. But a number of years ago, so again, this is nothing new. This is from 2014. The Department for Education, Nicky Morgan at the time, published the workload review, and these 3 words emerged. I guess if you think of any assessment strategy, it has to be manageable for you as a teacher. Otherwise, you're not going to keep on doing it. Ultimately, when I've marked Bryce's piece of work here on my table, he needs to be able to understand what I've asked him to do. So it needs to be meaningful, and it needs to motivate him to do it with or without me in the classroom. So that, you know, those 3 keywords are a good reminder for all, particularly for policies. And I've seen these 3 words emerge a lot in teaching and learning policies over the last 5 or 6 years, as a reminder that that's how we should try and approach this big burden that all teachers face, this marking burden. All of you will have marking codes. They're very, very helpful. I think they become a bit tricky when they're implied across all schools and it's this way or else. I think departments, particularly at secondary, need to adapt these to suit their different subjects. And again, as a teacher trying to reduce that burden, these allow teachers to allow pupils to translate your codes so that they can act on your feedback. For you marking 30, 40, 50, 60, hundreds of assignments on a weekly basis, this allows you to optimize your time and help students move forward. Just before I move on to another quick practical technique you can talk about in your breakaways, I just want to talk to you quickly about this piece of research from 2007. This is 7 principles of good feedback. If I ask you to draw a volcano and label the parts of a volcano, describe to me how lava erupts. Inside this gray zone here, these are all the things that happen internally that I need to find out as a teacher. What's your cultural capital? What strategies do you already know? Are you motivated? Monday morning, Friday period 5, all those types of issues. What goal will the student now set? What are they willing to do? What might they get away with? And then the tactics and strategies they deploy or use, and what also I offer them in the class. They'll then set their internal learning goal, and I need to draw that out in particular. And what you're doing in the classroom on your feet is observing behaviors, non-verbal signals, pupils' engagement in class, and you use this data to then plan what to do in the moment or for next lesson. And that's a very brief summary. And I've got another diagram that I'll show you later, summarizing this in another way in terms of 7 good principles for approaching assessment and feedback. Here is the next key idea, and I've been using this now for 10 years. This is inspired by Paul Bambrick-Santoyo's book, Leverage Leadership. He's now just published the 2nd version, actually, Leverage Leadership 2.0. He works very closely with Doug Lamoff over in the States. Here it is: PIPL, so praise, probe, identify, plan, and lock. And what I love about this is because it's now embedded into my DNA, I use this in 30-second scripts. Brilliant for teachers who are sitting beside students with assessment, brilliant for corridor conversations, managing low-level behavior. It's also an excellent tool for lesson observation feedback, appraisal discussions, and you'd obviously maybe stretch out the conversation over 10, 12 minutes or so. But for the classroom, 30 seconds or a minute, it might look like this. So if I just go through step by step, Bryce is in my classroom. I've just marked his assignment. I say, Bryce, can I have a word in your ear, please? Just step outside for a moment. and then I go to number 1. I'm really pleased with your Christian attitudes to wealth and poverty. It's a great piece of work. But why do you keep calling out and disrupting the lesson when I pose a question to the class? Is it because you're sitting next to Ross? Is it because you missed last lesson? You've just forgot and you're showing off, whatever it would be. And I then allow the student to identify what is it that they could do to fix this. We then make a plan. So Bryce has chosen that he wants another chance and that he might want me to say to the whole class, don't shout out, to remind him not to call out. And before he returns to class, I ask him to lock or to repeat back to me what we've agreed so I can check for understanding. This is a fabulous script, something that I live and die by, and I think it's a great little tool that you could probably use when you're giving feedback to your A-level students. So on this screen here, everyone, there's a little QR code you can scan. You get this template, and I would really encourage you to try this on the left-hand side as a structure for a conversation about a piece of work. You might, over time, use this in behavior conversations. It's a fabulous script to follow if you've observed another teacher and you've got 10 or 15 minutes dedicated to a bit of feedback. And the schools that I now work with, we're using this for appraisal where teachers set their own appraisal targets rather than be set appraisal targets from someone up above. So I would ask you, perhaps when you go into your breakout sessions, if you could think about all the things I shared today, probably practice this one together and take 5 minutes each to practice with doing it first to each other. And you might want to, just for a role play, just make up an example problem that you currently have and ask the other person to walk through this script as they pose questions to you to help solve your problem. On this screen, the QR code, I won't play the video. If you want to watch me do a little demo in greater depth, there's a little example there of me just explaining it. So I'll just give you a chance to scan that if you want to. And if we take it a little bit further, so there's a lot of discussion, particularly online, about coaching, instructional coaching, etc. These are 3 tools I've used for many years. The miracle question, imagine if, and I'm speaking to Bryce here, imagine if, Bryce, you had given me an example of why money matters. Describe to me what you would have said or what you would do. So it's a great little strategy to elicit a bit of self-regulation, a bit of metacognition. My top tip here, when you're having a conversation with someone, just pose back, imagine if X, describe to me B. Second one is exceptions. If I say to you, the boys never shut up in a lesson observation piece of feedback, you would say to me, well, all the boys, are they always really noisy every lesson of the week? Or is there a particular time? So it's about narrowing down the definitions. One of the greatest things I've learned on my doctoral studies is the importance of being super specific and narrowing down the details. The last strategy is scaling. I'm just digging out here in my bag to hand. Here we go. I'm just going to come off the screen. Scaling. If I'm sitting beside you and giving you a bit of feedback, I just introduced this 10-point scale. Mine's laminated. You don't need to laminate it. You just draw a 0 to 10 on a piece of paper. As soon as I put this scale in between you and I on a table, if I'm sitting beside you in the classroom, it draws our attention to this scale. And all I simply do is tell me about your behavior, your work, your homework, your feedback. And if 10 was great, 0 not so good, I get the student to articulate where they see themselves. If they say 5, immediately I say, well, why not a 4? Tell me why you're a 5. What one thing could we do to get to a 6? And so on and so forth. And I have here on the back, if you're interested, I can just ping this over, just some of the work that I've done with Chris Moyes in coaching, loads of coaching questions here in the back. Another great strategy for sitting beside students and articulating assessment and feedback in the classroom. Okay, let's move forward. So those are 3 strategies there that you can use on top of the PIPL. I think when we also provide a bit of assessment and feedback, we should think carefully about where our feedback sits. This is a great little book called The Decision Book. What I love about this book is on one page, it's got a diagram. On the other side, it's just a 30-second, 1-minute summary of a piece of research or a great resource. This one was in the book. If I say, Bryce, great piece of work, but you've not spelt the word there, that's a criticism. And that word in particular, but, is all he'll remember, and it might not motivate him to take action. Sometimes I need to tell him what to do. If I'm an NQT, I might need to be told also. Compliments, good for self-esteem, good for motivation. But where I really need to move towards metacognition, self-regulation, is making those suggestions. So questions such as, why did you choose A instead of B? Describe to me how you did C instead of D, and so on and so forth. Okay, a couple more, and then we'll pause. This is from Mark Planteach. So this is all in the cartoons that you've got. This is just interventions that you do on your feet, behind the scenes, just a range of examples. I'll give you an example now on a kind of visual example for number 7. I think critically, 3, the research always recommends to narrate your thinking out aloud, and number 8 in particular, to not assume, to always check. For people, I know you've looked at Rosenshine, not many people have looked at the original paper from 1982. The words check for understanding coincidentally feature 17 times last time I had a look. So it's just worth always checking the learning as you go through. Another key idea was the modeling. You'll be familiar with this. I do it first, watch me do it, then we do it together. Then you do it on your own. The most effective teaching requires modeling. Here's one I made earlier. Here's one that didn't work. Here's a half example, and then use that forward. I'm going to just come off the screen. I'm just going to pause on this slide here. I'm a big fan of non-verbal signals. I wonder how you use non-verbal signals in your classrooms, not just for A-level teaching in particular, to help communicate important information. So I've just got here my mini whiteboard. Every teacher should have one. I'm just going to write that equation on the chat, on the boards, and here I've got it here. I'm going to do 2 demonstrations. Tell me what's the difference and put your answer in the chat box. Here's version 1. 7 times something equals 28. Version 2, 7 times something equals 28. What was the difference? Non-verbal signal. Okay, 7 times something equals 28. Version 2, 7 times something equals 28. Answers in the chat box. Okay, we've got a few confident answers, a few question marks, not sure. So version 1, 7 times something equals 28. Version 2 is the tap. 7 times something equals 28. To make this more powerful, offer the students more data, more feedback, I look at you instead. 7 times something equals 28. Eye contact, you can see what I'm saying, and the tap offers more data to help emphasize this is the key piece of information. It's another form of assessment, nothing written down. It's another way to communicate. It's something you should consider consciously in your classroom. Okay, let's just pop forward a little bit more. Okay, this is going to take, hopefully you're thinking about marking and feedback a step forward. This is where I'm currently looking at a little research. I'm not going to ask you to write anything down, but I just want you to have a little think about different types of feedback. So we've got written feedback. I've just given you an example of non-verbal feedback. So I'm just going to put these on the screen. Well before I started teaching, we've got the written, verbal and non-verbal. About a decade ago, these words started to emerge. I wonder if you're familiar with these in particular. We all default to the word feedback. We often default in the world of teaching to written feedback being the most popular or the most important. Feedback is when we compare the new piece of work to where they were before. Or you've got feed up, where you compare the actual status of the work to their target grade. And this is something you might subconsciously be doing in your A-level teaching. And then feed forward, explaining the target grade, the target status of the work to their actual status. So you've got two subtle differences here, providing feed up towards the target grade, or incremental feedback, or feed forward, I should say, to the next stage, regardless of how far I am away from the finished grade. So if we look at those 6 and then change them slightly, I've now got 9 different ways of providing assessment. I've probably read about 200 school teaching and learning policies. Less than a handful are starting to move towards, or move away from marking, move away from feedback towards these subtle differences. Think about all the different teachers in your school, everyone teaching different subjects, different year groups, primary, secondary, A-level, etc. All these require lots of different translations depending on who you're working with and how much feedback they can cope with. We take it one step further. You'll have seen this. So this emerged in the profession in England here about 10 years ago. I'm sure you'll have tried that. So using those feedback strategies here, and this is inspired by my conversations with John Hattie, looking at this one step further, changing the whole class feedback sheet into these 3 groups: feed up, feedback, and feed forward. And maybe if you think about the kids in your A-level class and dividing them into these 3-pronged approaches, you can enhance your assessment maybe one step further by changing the way that you provide them with some commentary in the classroom, whether it's written, spoken, or non-spoken. So those are those 2 resources there. There's that QR code. I'll give you a moment to just scan that. If you're not familiar with the whole class feedback sheet, just in case you're not, rather than me mark physically 30 books, I annotate that one sheet. The assessment means to sit beside, so I sit beside groups of students. We all know it's nigh on impossible to sit next to every single student in class and provide feedback. So it's just thinking about a range of strategies that you can choose as and when required to make things easier for you and the students. Now, this is inspired by Professor Robert Coe, 16 Influences, The Power of Feedback. I'm not sure if you've all seen this, but let me just put them all on the screen. I will not go through them all, but something you can talk about in your breakouts. If I look at just number 8, when I mark Bryce's work, so here I am holding it up at the camera, I can choose if I want to give him feedback there and then, or delay it, wait till the end of the lesson, or wait till next lesson. That will have a significant difference on how he responds to my feedback. Just this one alone that you might choose to do already subconsciously. Number 9, is it specific or general? Number 7, is it positive or negative? Lots of these also aren't factored into whole school teaching and learning policies. So again, if you're a school leader watching, then this might be something you might want to take your own feedback policy one step further. I reminded you of the 7 principles of feedback. So here they are. Okay, in summary. So let me just pop back to number 1. Here's what a good one looks like. I pose a question, I pose a thought, provide a bit of a feedback. I might want to initiate some kind of discussion in class, provide those non-verbal or verbal signals, thumbs up, thumbs down, well done, have you thought about X? Where all teachers spend all their efforts is 6, your interventions in the moment or behind the scenes through schemes of work, curriculum planning, or whatever else it might be. And you use this data to inform how you approach next lesson. So you'll know my 5-minute lesson plan. Here is an incarnation of that framework, but this 7-stage feedback plan. You might want to play with this and think about, if you've just marked a huge assignment and you want to think about how you might want to offer feedback to your students, this 7-stage feedback model is just designed as a lesson plan kind of template where you might want to scribble on this and just think through how you might want to approach feedback for the next lesson. So there's the QR code for this, all the slides and the resources. Any questions, put them in the chat box. I'm just going to pause for 10 or 15 seconds just to catch up on your chat box comments. Okay, I'm going to spend a bit more time on this fourth idea, and I'm going to whistle stop through the very last one. Questioning. Here are 10 ideas. Now, we all can ask lots of questions. How important are your questions in terms of assessments in the moment? Number 5, we should all avoid the who can tell me approach. I hope that's pretty standard and familiar with you. If I say who can tell me what I said 3 minutes ago, I'm going to get no response. I haven't checked the learning. It's going to be a total waste of my time and yours. So you need to think carefully about how you can approach different questions. Other than the 5-minute lesson plan, and I'll just reference that at the end for people that haven't seen it, because there are one or two. The second most popular resource on my site is the question matrix. I shared this probably 10 years ago. So there's the QR code if you've not seen it. I've got these 40 questions embedded into my teacher DNA. So the principle, if you've not seen it, is I choose a question on the left-hand side, I connect it to one at the top, and then I fill in the details. So what is, I might have a picture of Mona Lisa on this grid, and I just start off with a question, what is this image? And as I move across the top, what is, what has, what can, what should, what would, what will, what might, I elicit different types of assessments and responses from students. How I've seen it work, big posters in classrooms. So the teacher sticks up this image. Students are then told to tackle these questions, and then they might respond with post-it notes up on the screen. So here's some examples. They swap them over, they get discussions, or as a teacher, I collect all the student questions. So on here, 40 times 30 kids in my class, I've got over a bank of 1,000 questions I could potentially edit and use in my schemes of work. This is also great when you put the blank template, so this one here, without the colored cells, as a photocopy into your students' books, or a teaching assistant uses it to help support your vulnerable learners as a script, as a thinking process. It's a very helpful tool for feedback and assessment. Let's just wrap this one up. This resource is just 7 different ways of constructing questions. So I think as teachers, not only you're mastering your subject knowledge, managing pupil behavior, but activating this hard thinking, you need to have a wide bank of questioning strategies. In this resource, if I just give you a little preview to one of the templates, you can see I've got just a range of questions across that second row here. So I guess you could just delete all these questions on this and just think about 7 different question structures that you might want to pose under a scheme of work that you're currently teaching your students. And then it gives you just a wide range of approaches to work with your students. So there's the QR code to this resource, everybody. Give you a moment to just scan that. I'm going to send everything through to Emma, so don't worry if you've not been able to scan everything, or if I'm going to, I suspect I'm going far too quick. And then from the Mark Plan Teach and stuff I've been reading and writing online, just some of my favorites. You'll be familiar with cold call and no opt out. If you're not, go on YouTube, look at Doug Lemoff's examples. They're a great little strategy. Of course, they work in particular contexts. One of my favorites from going back 15 years is the phrase pose, pause, pounce, bounce. I believe it uses all of these techniques in one on the screen, and it's probably one of the most popular, at least in England, for a number of years now. It's a bit of a mouthful, pose, pause, bounce, bounce, but the notion is that you pose the question, you pause, so that's drawn upon Mary Budrow's research here from the States in the 70s. Wait gives students particular time to process. And if you're not familiar with Fermi draws upon, so I'll skip the next slide, which has got Mary Budrow's summary research here, but the Fermi question draws upon this chap, Enrico Fermi, where he posed vague questions to elicit creative responses. As a teacher, they're great for workload because it gives me time to think as a teacher, some breathing time while I get the kids having a discussion. One example might be, in your classroom where you teach, I might pose a question as a starter. How many balloons could you fit in this classroom? The kids start discussing, but because I've posed limited information, I haven't given the context. Is it a hot air balloon, a water balloon, or a party pack of 50 balloons in a pack that have not blown up? It gets the kids thinking. It gives me breathing time. It's another methodology. So you might want to look that one up. On my blog, I've got 2 blogs on Fermi questions with about 300 question examples in there. The key part to emphasize, it's a statistical question. So it's framed along the lines of how many X, Y, Z, depending on what you're teaching. And also that you pose vague information to elicit a range of responses in your students. Okay, the last one, I'm going to whistle stop tour because I don't want to chuck loads of data at you. Secure overview. In the Mark Plan Teach cartoon, it's all about the logistics of your students, your classroom environment, tables and chairs, the position of the door, where you position yourself, but also the data. Here are some key questions from me that you might want to look back at in the breakout session. Some teachers I work with don't have schemes of work, sadly. Their teachers, for some reason, choose not to share them, or they're not available for some reason. It's important that you have access to your curriculum plans. That at least gives you a starting point. And then you can look at data, trust the data. Is it reliable? Do you understand what all these acronyms mean? And can you use this as a starting point to move forward? Hopefully, as an A-level teacher, you're a bit of a pro in terms of translating all these acronyms and data. But we should never take it for granted. It's always something that we should all try to revise and update. And of course, dialogue changes. But in summary, step 1, I grab the data, I check that it's accurate, and I might want to test this in class with assessments, whether it's just quick quizzes, retrieval practice, or actually 6-mark questions, etc. And then behind the scenes, step 3, I'm checking in with form tutors, checking in with families, watching how Ross behaves on the playground, and gathering a full and secure overview of where my student is, where they need to get to, and how I can help them along the way. So the last slide I'll share is this just QR code. On my site, I've got a little data exercise for you, just in case. Now, not many of us like looking at data, but just in case you want a little bit of a CPD exercise, I've got a little data exercise here for you with a series of questions, just in case you want to upskill some of your thinking. There'll be 1 or 2 bits of terminology that might not be familiar or might need to evolve, but at least it's a little starting point for you. Now, I've done 50 minutes. I know I've been chatting at you. There was the slide I shared with you at the start. I've got lots more material. There's more in the slides, but I think it's best if I just pause here and I'll just finish with one last thing. With all the things that you're doing, we've got curriculum plans and schemes of work. We know study skills are important. And we know these things must be taught. On my website and in the slides that you've been given, here's just an example of where I might teach these explicit study skills to my A-level students on a month-by-month basis. I've put these in any particular order, particularly in the top area. You'll all know retrieval, hopefully. You'll all know about spaced interleaving practice. So these things are embedded over time. But I wonder if your curriculum and schemes of work, if they are available, and hopefully they are, you can now take this forward and start to identify where these study skills are exclusively taught. And I'll just finish it there. And that's in my new book, Revision Revolution, where we unpick these examples in greater depth and look at the cognitive science behind how you can make these things a bit more explicit for your students. Why? Because it's a social justice issue. And maybe you, as well as me, when we were at school, we weren't taught necessarily how to learn, or at least I wasn't. So I think these things are important, and we have a lot greater access to these resources than we did maybe 20 or 30 years ago. My email address, everybody, so I know you've got to go off to a breakout room and you've got these links in the chat box. There is my email address. If you've got any questions, I'm going to code this video, share it with Emma, and you can watch it later. Here is the hyperlink, again, in the chat box. So any questions at all? That's it there. It needs a capital CPD to work. I appreciate it's a whistle-stop tour of a couple ideas. I think the crux for me is to look at the verbal feedback research and see how it can inform your teaching and learning policy and your way of working. Marking drives teachers crazy all across the world, so we need to move away from this notion that everything has to be written. Obviously, A-level requires a degree of that in more than other aspects of school life. And I think if you think of the power of feedback research from Robert Coe and those 9 different types of feedback, maybe we can move away from just feedback being the only word we also use and consider a non-verbal and verbal as other ways to evidence student progress. And I think that what that would do is support everybody working in the profession to move away from the notion that it's always got to be written and always marked. So hopefully next time students ask, Miss, can you mark my work, please? You can go back and say, well, I've got 9 different ways I can give you assessment. Which way would you like? So I'll leave it there. Can I wish you all the best in difficult circumstances still, and keep up the good work. Thank you, everybody.
Just wanted to echo there. Thank you very much, Ross, for your input this afternoon, and I hope everyone has some really productive discussions in their breakouts. So just a quick leg stretch. You should all have your invites from your facilitators, and have a lovely time chatting with your fellow historians and biologists and so forth. So thanks again. Bye-bye.
Emma, what I'll do is I'll just go through the chat box and just answer some questions on the recording, and then I'll stop the recording once I've gone through them all, so people can watch back the questions later, just to make sure that I've clarified that. So I'll spend 5 minutes going through those questions and then the recording, just so that's all recorded there for people that have left the group already, if that's okay. Okay, so for people either hanging in or off to a breakout room, I'm just going to go through the questions in the chat box and make sure I've answered everyone's concerns just for the recording, and I'll reference that people who have already left, that they can see me commenting on all your questions at the end of the recording. Okay, so I've got a question in the chat box. How do you manage giving verbal feedback to each student, or can this be whole class? It's a good question. I guess, as ever, with nuance required, my default would be, first of all, if we're talking about at least in an A-level perspective, some of you will be teaching kids with 30 in the class, others will just have 5 or 6. So already we've got a timing issue there to try and answer the question. But, PIPL, I've given you a range of strategies. You've got the yellow box, the PIPL. The PIPL script, with practice, I do believe you can master in 30 seconds, a minute. And if you've only got 5 A-level kids in your class, you can spend a lot more time. If you've got 30 kids, then it's going to be a bigger challenge. So nuance as ever, all these strategies work. You need to ask yourself, in what conditions and what strategies can I select at certain times of the year, certain classes, in order to be successful. So I hope that at least answered that question. Let's see another question. So the double tap, whole class feedback sheets. So whole class feedback sheets, in some schools, when it first evolved, it became a bit of a policy thing where it was required to be done. And I think the danger with school policies is when it's stipulated as something that has to be done, I think that's a challenge between schools wanting consistency and where ideas potentially lead to being not having a great impact. Of all the schools that I've worked with, not one school says they're consistent. I think it's the problem with the word more than anything. I think we need to change it to coherence. Teachers want to be clear about what the school's vision and values are and what the direction is of the school, and the teaching and learning policy often is the route map. But where it's required to be translated between our teachers is what you do with an A-level class in maths is going to be very different to what I do in a DT lesson with year 7. And if we think about all these strategies I've shared today, if you're suddenly a primary teacher teaching year 1s, these ideas will not work, pure and simple. So all teaching ideas require translation. And if we think about just a large secondary school institution where you've got 100 teachers across the school doing lots of different things, then all of a sudden, one idea isn't going to work in all classrooms. So I think, if we think about that whole class feedback, it's another approach. I think if a school then insists that it has to be used, then that might become a problem for certain teachers and certain subjects. If it's then said it must be done once a week, uploaded as evidence, in a folder, then these are the issues that drive our teachers out of the profession. And I hope we've got a lot more intuitive and intelligent school leaders out there that are not asking for these types of things. And I appreciate behind the scenes a lot of the accountability framework that we have across the English profession drives a lot of these issues. Someone's put on there, I always know there's one or two people in the world. What is the 5-minute lesson plan? So if you go to my site, teachertoolkit.co.uk, on the banner, you've got the 5-minute lesson plan. It's a thinking process for lesson plans rather than filling in a form. And it takes you through, there's a video tutorial that just takes you through that process of thinking about approaching a lesson rather than having to fill in a detailed form. Many new teachers to the profession are still told, particularly in the early careers framework now, they might be told by their teacher trainer to fill in a form. I think that's got some benefits, but when it becomes a laborious process for evidence and QTS, you can see why we might still have 40% of our teachers leaving the profession within the first couple of years of being qualified. We can't sustain that model. So we need to think a bit more smartly about why we want our new teachers to the profession to submit detailed lesson plans still. I think that dialogue's been, well, it's been a discussion for nearly 15 years now, but it's still prevalent in some schools, sadly. So the 5-minute lesson plan was a solution to that notion at that particular time. And many teachers around the world have found it quite a beneficial process. Someone's asked, what happens if the school doesn't like whole class feedback? Well, that's the challenge for all teachers in all schools. I've done a lot of research into power and influence, and power, it manifests itself in 3 ways: hierarchical or positional. So I'm the head teacher, I decide. The second one is monetary. I'm the school budget holder for CPD. No, you can't go on that course. Yes, you can. So that's that power. Or teachers always tell me, I'm just a teacher. What can I do to make a difference? The third source of power is knowledge. If you know the most about marking, feedback, assessment in your subject, and people gather themselves around you for your expertise, you can start to influence those other sources of power. And that's what I've seen on my travels, seen lots of teachers online through their blogs and tweets about becoming an expert in their field and really making a difference, not just for colleagues in their own school setting, but colleagues elsewhere. And that's, that's pretty much my social media story too. And that's it. I think I've answered all the questions. I've just read the last comment there from Juliet. Thank you. We started verbal feedback 2009, a total game changer. Well, that's a great way to finish. Thank you. I know it makes a big difference. What you need to do is translate all this into your own setting and apply it to your own context. I'm going to stop things there, Emma. I'll press the recording stop. I'll send it to you over to you shortly. At least I've addressed all those questions in the chat box for people, and hopefully they'll get a bit more information if they want it.
Lovely, that's great. Thank you so much, Ross.